Okay, we are live.
We are. Hey, how's it going, everybody? Nice. Hey, I see Rad. That's the first time I've said that aloud. I hope I said that right.
Rad. Do I need to put headphones on? Or am I good?
You can hear you, Suzanne.
Is there an echo on me? There automatically became an echo when this went live for me.
No, I think I should be good as long as y'all aren't echoing to yourselves.
Can you guys hear me still?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, I fixed it. I did that dumb thing I do every time where I have two windows open that are both recording me. That was the problem last time. I was too ashamed to tell you guys that it was actually two windows open. Well, thanks everybody for coming. Thanks, Mark. Paul, how's it going? Amanda, how's the new job going, Amanda?
Mark.
Let's see, I'm not
Austin.
seeing us on YouTube.
Jay.
Yes, Bill.
Bill. Hi, Bill. Yes, that is Bailey and Suzanne. Suzanne with a Z.
Yeah.
And embarrassingly, Suzanne and I have worked together for 5 years, and every so often I still call her Susan, which she does not let me forget when I do that.
It's so crazy.
It really is.
Well, then I just start calling him Justin for about 2 days after that.
Right. Yeah, like when people email me and then they email me and call me Justin, and I'm like, it says Dustin in my name. What's going on here? Jeff. Hey, Jeff.
Let's see.
Vincent. Paul. Okay, we're gonna get started here. We have quite a few people that are here, and I'm sure as we get going, more people will arrive. So thanks for joining us. This is our ColorLab anniversary webinar. It's been a year since we released, and it's easily been, gosh, it has to be, if not our top product, one of the top 3 products that was ever made. And so we thought, well, what can we do to celebrate this? And we realized that something that would be valuable is there's just a lot of just basic things that like are little gaps that we wanted to fill in. And we also surveyed everybody to find out what does everybody want to know about ColorLab. And a lot of people mentioned how to resize brushes. Give me a hey-o if you're wondering about resizing the brushes and the patterns, creating authentic effects like the ink starve, registration errors, printing, making sure it's ready for print, and also just basic. There's a lot of people that have been like, I just haven't started. I just haven't had time to start. So this is the time to start, and we're going to make it as easy as possible for you. So I'm going to share a couple slides. I have a very rudimentary slide deck here just to keep us on track. We're going to try to keep this to an hour to 70 minutes with maybe a little bit of extra time at the end for Q&A if Robin is available to do that. Let me see if I can share my screen here. Share screen. I haven't been on video in front of people in so long. I feel so weird. Can you guys see my keynote?
You're bigger than your keynote. There you go.
There it is.
Okay, cool. Okay, so welcome. This is Getting the Most Out of ColorLab. And here's the agenda we have for you guys tonight. So we're starting with a welcome, which we're doing right now. How to set up ColorLab. Sounds simple, but a lot of you have probably realized it isn't as, well, it is simple, but it can be just enough of a challenge that it stops people from getting started. And we realized that just setting it up properly eliminates about 80% of the problems that people encounter. After we cover that, we're going to get into getting the analog details right, That's the things like the ink starve, the registration errors, and anything else that you have that you want to know about. And then color palettes asterisks and printing asterisks, followed by Q&A and a conclusion for it. And I say asterisks for the color palettes and printing because some of that will be covered just naturally as we go through the first two. And also depending on if time permits, we don't want to crunch that stuff in and make it so you don't get value out of it. So if that happens, we do free webinars like this every Thursday. So you're welcome to join us for those. And the next one we could do color palettes. And the next one we'll do printing, where we'll kind of cover those as we do art. But we will try our best to get that all in today. One more thing I wanted to mention is that we have a ask a question area at the bottom you might see. So if you have a question while Robin is demonstrating something, please add it to the ask a question area. If you do that, others can upvote it, and then we know what questions are most valuable, and we can prioritize those questions and get those questions asked for you. So the format's basically going to be, I'm going to tell you what we're going to talk about. Robin's going to demonstrate it on Procreate. If you have questions about Illustrator, Photoshop, or Affinity, we have Suzanne here, the product creator, who can help to talk about the details of those specific versions. I guess the last thing I'd say about this is, even if you feel like you know something we're talking about, keep an open mind to it. A lot of times there's things that it feels like we know, and then it turns out when we like hear it from a different angle, we realize, oh, I was actually like missing that certain part of it. Okay, so without further ado, do a quick introduction just so you guys know who we all are. I'm Dustin. I'm the founder. Started RetroSupply 7 or 8 years ago to make diaper money for my firstborn daughter, and it turned into a really fun business. It's just we get to do retro stuff full time, so it's awesome. We also have Suzanne Sarver, who is amongst many things, product creator. Suzanne devised the entire system for how ColorLab works and spent many, many months working on it and knows all the ins and outs of it. Robin Banks is our in-house resident illustrator. We've been working together, gosh, almost 2 years, not quite. So Robin will be demonstrating how to do this in Procreate, and I will be kind of addressing the subjects as we go through. And lastly, we have Bailey Curry, who is our community specialist. We have a really great community here this past year with COVID and all the people in lockdown. We just started working on community building and realized there were so many people that became friends on Instagram and other places. And in fact, we even made something called the Secret Society, which some of you might be a part of, where people share work and freebies and free resources, and it's a lot of fun, and we can share a link to that if you are interested as well. Okay, so we're going to get started with how to set up ColorLab. And like I said, we're doing this in Procreate because by far most people are using Procreate. You're probably using Procreate, but if you're using something different and something doesn't make sense, feel free to ask it as a question, and we will do our best to address it. But most of these ideas apply from software to software.
Real quick before we get started, we had a question. Will this webinar be recorded and shared? The answer is yes. We're going to have it available on Crowdcast and on YouTube and possibly in the community section as well, but you'll be able to get it regardless. Yep,
these are all saved, and in fact, we're planning, if everything goes smoothly, to break this one up and edit it so you can see individual sections where we address things. Okay, so let's get started. So first we're going to talk about how to set up ColorLab, everything you need to know to start using ColorLab, and we're just going to go step by step through all the things you need to do to succeed with ColorLab. This really is the most important part, and we're going to start with loading paper textures. And Robin, can you start us off and show us how to load some paper textures?
Yeah, for sure. So when you get ColorLab, you're going to get an email that will give you a link to where you can download everything, and there's going to be tutorials in here. There's a paint by number worksheet, so you can sort of try to do what I've done with it over on your own. And just below these tutorials, we've got everything that you're going to need. We've got your halftone brushes, your color palette, pen and print brushes, pre-mixed halftones if you choose to use that, and your paper templates and your color chart. So here in paper templates, I've got a 12.9-inch model. So I'm going to be using those paper templates. So I would just click on it and it'll bring up a download. I've already downloaded it, so I'm not going to do that right now. But over in my downloads, I've got all of those paper textures. So every time that I start a ColorLab project, I just look at my paper textures and I decide which kind I want it on. I think this one I did on aged cover stock. So I click it, it'll import it, and there it is. And this one, we've decided that it's going to live on Instagram. So with that being its endpoint, I know that Instagram favors squares. So what I did is I went into the canvas and the settings, and it says that it's 5100 pixels by 4080 pixels. So I'm just going to make this side match the other side. Oops, 4080, and press done. It'll crop the canvas. So once I've cropped the canvas to my square size, I would start a new layer above the yellow layer. And let's see, what did I do? I used standard pencils. I like to use a red color because that's what I sketch with in real life. And I just sketched on one layer. After
So,
I'm done, yeah.
Robin, to clarify that, this layer then that you're putting on top of the yellow, red, and blue is for your sketching.
Yep, this is just for sketching. Generally, I'll turn down the opacity of that layer too, so it's pretty faint. Then after that, I'm going to start my inking layer after I've got a sketch all done. And I, again, just hit new layer. That's the little plus thing up there. For this one, I use standard pens, and I used the Ramen brush pen. That's my favorite. That's my go-to pen for inking, especially for comic type stuff.
And I think the Ramen brush pen is also in the ColorLab pen. Like it comes with ColorLab too.
Yeah, it is in the pens and print
Yeah.
section
Cool.
of it. Though I noticed that one's a hair thinner.
Yeah.
It doesn't make a big difference, but it made a difference for me. So I used that one. But they're both generally the same. So yeah, I just inked what I had sketched that way. Cool. So yeah, we'll go over here. Robin,
they love your pencil squishy.
Oh, just my rubber bands around it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks. I couldn't get one to fit on there correctly. It like made a cracking noise, so I stopped trying to push it on and just wrapped rubber bands around it.
Yeah, that's not a good sound on an Apple Pencil. Okay, so to clarify, so we just went over the layers, or to reiterate, I should say, we loaded the paper textures, we went over the layers, and we're moving to where some stuff is penned in essentially, so we save you the time of watching all of the ink work, so we can talk more about the actual concepts of it. And right now you're going to import tools, correct?
Yeah. So yeah, we'll go back here to my loading page. And then there's the halftone brushes. This is everything that ColorLab revolves around. Press download. You'll download the brush set. I'll actually do it because it shouldn't take too long. And there it's up here downloading. Feels longer when someone's watching you. You're alone. Feels like nothing.
Yeah, it's like emotional relativity.
So after that's loaded, I just click it and it imports it. And when it imports it, that'll all go to the top of my brush library. And then I will be using those. I'm going to delete that one. I don't want to fill this thing up with too much stuff. Did you want to talk about the size of the dots right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that's a big question for people. So yeah, I think this is a great time.
Cool. So when you load it, the default setting that we decided upon in grain size here is 55%. We hear a lot of people saying that, you know, it feels too big or something like that. But we tested it a bunch. And when you've got this square size or, you know, anything using that default paper that I've pulled up and you move it into Instagram, it compresses it so much that 55% is the best way for it to do that without causing awkward patterns all over it and things. But if you wanted to take it and make it smaller for any reason, maybe you're like doing a really large poster or something, you're going to print it out at the size it is, then you may want to make your halftones smaller. So what you would do is go to where it says scale, and that's under the grain thing in the Brush Studio. And don't ever change it with this slider. That's a really bad idea because it lies about the percentage size. It says 48% right now, but it may be actually at 48.2%, 48.9%. And that makes a big difference on ColorLab because all of those dots need to line up exactly right for them to be able to make these colors perfectly and not cause any odd patterns. So what you do is you click there and you can just type in what you need. I'm bringing it back to 55, which is where I was at.
That's such a good tip.
Yeah, we found that by accident too. Robin was like, these halftones, they're not lining up, Suzanne. I'm like, I promise they work. They're working for me. And then we got on a call together and realized that the slider is not trustworthy.
Sure. Chad says, I can't take any more of your lies, Procreate.
I know.
Yeah, it's not just a Procreate thing. The reason why I thought of that is coming from coffee and having coffee scales and trying to weigh an espresso. We found out that some of our scales didn't have a point system, and it did that same thing where we're like, this isn't tasting right. Oh, that's because it's actually at 14.9, not like exactly 14.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to see the paper that I printed out of it at its exact size and how I needed to change the dot size, or do you want to do that later?
What do you guys think, guys? Kiki, Chad, I know there's like 200 plus people on here. I'm just looking at the first names I see. Robin has printed out some examples of just how much the dots, seeing them printed, can impact things.
Yeah, let's just talk about it while we're thinking about it. So I made this poster and I'm going to screen print it. Now, because first I was just bringing it over into Instagram and I wanted it to look good, I kept all of those brushes at their 55 grain percentage. And that felt great and that worked great. But I decided that I wanted to screen print it. So I had to take all of these layers and print them out and make positives. But let's see the canvas information. This is physically, when you print it out, if you don't shrink it or anything, it's at 13.6 inches by 17 inches, which is an awesome size for a poster. But let's see. But when I printed it out and I got them, like these dots are massive. Or like comparing my hand next to those dots, they look so crazy. Like that's not going to look very good on a poster. So that, I don't know, that just goes to say, like, always design with your application in mind. if you're designing something for print, you may want to use smaller halftones. If you're designing something where it's going to end up smaller and compressed, then you may want to use bigger halftones, and always test it out before you do your official thing.
Absolutely. When we a lot of you went through the survey and asked your questions about ColorLab, a big one that came up was, well, what dot size should I use when I'm printing? And it's so hard to give an answer because obviously things are different sizes, and really something as simple as printing it out on your printer at the actual size is going to help you to quickly get a grasp so much easier than us telling you and potentially being totally wrong.
Yeah, and I know it seems like a pain to do something like that, and it was a pain for me to like drive to Kinko's, pick these up, decide it was wrong, recolor it, and then again go drive to Kinko's and get this thing printed out. But in the long run, it's worth it, because I used to take shortcuts all the time in the first few years of me creating art, all of the time. And like I look back and I'm like, damn, if only I had taken some extra time, I would still really like this piece. But because of like being lazy and sloppy, I don't like a lot of the stuff that I made.
Do you feel like after doing this for a while, you've gotten a better sense naturally of what the right size is, like from printing things a few times?
Yeah, so I think what I realized on this one was that I haven't screen printed since we updated ColorLab and we optimized it for things like Instagram and Twitter for things to post there. And we did expand the grain size sense. And that didn't occur to me, but now it will.
And so you do have like a percentage for the scale that you typically always go with for Instagram, right?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of depends on what I'm doing with it, but
Right.
but 55% is a safe bet that it's going to look good.
Right. And you have, I thought this was really interesting when I found out that you were doing this. You have like a ghost account on Instagram that you use just to post things to see what the dot size looks like or what it looks like in general before you actually post it publicly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's kind of like with printing, you always should do a test print or a test post before to see if the dot size is looking like it should.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a question.
And you'll be surprised sometimes. I'll think that I know everything about it, and then you'll get like a purple or something where the dots are really strong, and the way that they blend together at a certain percentage, when it's compressed, they just conflict and they cause like a terrible pattern that you didn't see coming. And then you'll have to go in and adjust, and you can fix things like that either by changing your dot size or maybe adding a little bit of blur to the dots so they don't interfere with each other so much.
There was a question from Chris Robin. This is a good question. Chris had said, what is the typical quote unquote retro DPI on print, which obviously on software, you want to have a 300 DPI when you're printing things out. But Bill had clarified and said, Chris, did you mean the DPI of the file or the typical size of the dots in ColorLab? Does that make sense?
I think so. I never change it. I never make it below 300 DPI ever. And these come at 300 DPI. So I like hardly ever think about it.
What about like if we opened up like a magazine ad or not a comic book? Like what if we opened a comic book and we like actually measured how many dots were in an inch on a comic book? Do you have any idea how many there would be traditionally?
Traditionally, not really, but I don't know for sure, but I would guess that they weren't thinking about it like that. because I think that if you were thinking about it like that with these halftones, that like this 55% wouldn't be, 300 dots of them within a square inch.
Right. Or else it would look like a solid color.
Yeah, which, I mean, sometimes they do. Like when they print this cover, that's very different than like when you open the page and you can see the halftones. This cover, you have to like get really close up to be able to see those halftones.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be worth, gosh, I actually literally want to get a ruler out now kind of after this and just count how many dots fit into a square inch. Because like rad, I'm sorry if that's not how you pronounce your name, rad. I just feel like I'm saying it wrong every time I say it. He said 150 DPI for newsprint, but yeah, that's another thing you'd have to experiment with, right? I'm going to. I'm so curious now.
I know that when I was working with a magazine in town, they wanted everything to be at 300 DPI, and that's kind of the basic go-to. I think for anything in print is 300 DPI. But maybe if you were working for like Vogue, you might want 600 DPI. I don't know.
Dan raises a good point in the chat that says dot size with retro work is often stylistic choice. I think they mean when working digitally, that it's a matter of preference at this point because you're not being constrained by the physical halftones or screen tones.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. If you have more questions about dots, please feel free to put it in the questions or message us somehow and let us know. We could definitely get more into dots on that, and we actually can probably serve the question better if we research it because it's a good question, and I literally had never thought of it the way you're describing it. So thanks for bringing that up. Robin, I know we got off a bit talking about dots for a while. Do you want me to try to tell you where we're at?
I believe we're at inking, right? Because we loaded the brushes.
So we imported the tools, check.
Yeah.
Download the color chart, check.
Yep. We haven't downloaded the color chart yet. Should we do that first?
Yes. Let's.
Cool.
And then we're on to setting up your canvas, which we did, and then building colors.
Okay.
Which
so
someone had said that. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. So just down here is the color chart. You just click download now. I'll bring you right to the color chart. You can add it to your photos. I've chosen to make it my background screen. That works really well for me because I work with it all of the time. But I'll just keep this one up in the browser here for now so that we can zoom in on it and everything. Is that all?
Yeah, that's great.
Should we ink?
Yes. Somebody asked what brush is better for, I guess they're saying like the border, I think like the outline. And I think you
have like a panel outline?
It says what brush is better for border the draw. I guess like to
I think
outline.
they mean the inking just in general.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a matter of preference. I really like the ramen brush. I know that people like Hyro Design really likes dry nib. He likes something that's a lot toothier than what I like. So yeah, I would just experiment, and then that's also going to depend on your application. Always keep that in mind, where it's going to be going, where it's going to be seen, and what you want from it. You're going to have a terrible time trying to screen print that, which is partially why I choose the ramen brush, because I have experience in screen printing it, and I've gone and made it something for Instagram, I think, and then it does really well, and people are like, oh, will you screen print that? And it's so much easier to be able to say yes than have to go back and reline it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So maybe you can, start inking a little bit just to show that off to people. I know that's a lot of people's favorite part.
So when I ink, I like to move really quickly. That's what's natural for me, and that's how I get the smoothest lines. And I move the paper around on the screen because I have like certain ways that feel really natural for me to ink. Like it's a lot easier to do this than it would be to like do the other way. So it's probably kind of irritating to watch me when your brain isn't moving while my brain is moving, because I flip around the screen a lot. On places like this, I did end up doing a double line. I like a really thick line around the edge of my character and thinner lines on the details like eyes, facial features.
What would you say to someone who says, I am holding the ramen brush right now, I'm doing exactly what it looks like you're doing, and it does not look anything like that?
I'm going to be honest, it's incredibly difficult, especially for me to ink. It takes a lot of time and practice, and I still end up erasing and redoing a lot. I'm naturally very shaky, which is partially why I have to do really quick lines, because I'll just shake if I try to like do a line like that. Like it doesn't work for my hands.
Oh God, that was really helpful to see you make that horrible line, because I think that everyone makes lines like that, and then when you make them so silky smooth, you wonder what's going on. So this really is, it's a matter of becoming a little swifter and adding energy to your line and becoming familiar with the right pressure for your style.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Robin actually made a video for us covering how they ink and using those fluid motions and kind of like some of the techniques they use. We have that up in the Secret Society.
Oh, yeah, good point. Yeah, there's a whole video where Robin talks about that. Yeah, it is very good.
So Johannes asks, will Streamline level 9000 help? And I was actually just going to mention that if you are just getting comfortable with using Procreate, or Photoshop has this too, where you can turn it and it's kind of training wheels for your hand as you start getting used to how drawing digitally works. So if it's helpful to you, go ahead and put the streamline up or put the smoothing up if you're working with Photoshop. And then as you start getting comfortable, move it down a little bit and start working your skills up that way until you basically don't have to use it anymore.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I hear people talk about it, like training wheels, or sometimes they'll even talk about it like it's cheating, but it's really not. And I don't think that anyone should ever feel bad about having to use their tools in a certain way. Not saying that that's
certainly
what you were
not,
saying,
yeah.
But I have seen people be like, oh, I have to have streamline up to 90 and I'm so ashamed. And it's like, that's not anything to be ashamed of. Make the tools work for you. I mess with this streamline like constantly. I've got it at 16 for my quick lines right now. But if I'm doing something like lettering, then I'll crank it because I need to like be really methodical about my movements,
And there are calligraphy artists who get jobs with like Hallmark who I've seen their videos and they still use Streamline. So absolutely think of it as just an extension of the tool.
Yeah, and it's like, this is so different than doing it physically too, where if you're like thinking about masters at lettering, like you've got this whole brush that's dragging like this long line behind it, where it's almost like streamline, but in real life, because that's how real brushes work. It's not like this hard thing against a smooth piece of glass where there's absolutely no friction.
Absolutely. Yeah, isn't it funny how I found I don't know how many of you are musicians, but I find that this is with any type of artist, we put these crazy restrictions in front of ourselves, like that we're only truly good if we can get past this self-imposed barrier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sick. So are we ready to move on to coloring, or do we want to talk about line work at all anymore?
I think we're good to move on if that's okay with you. We do have a question about the color chart. So this would be a good opportunity to kind of quickly go over it or to explain how you reference the color chart.
Okay. What was the question?
Just if we had gone over it yet and if you could explain like what the numbers mean.
No, we've not gone over it yet. Hold on, let me flip this record. Okay. So the color chart looks confusing at first, but it's organized in a way that's actually really intuitive. I think you'll find after using it for a while. So it goes in the order of how much yellow is within the color. This has 0 amount of yellow, and this has a complete amount of yellow. And then as it goes down this way, it adds blue. And as it goes this way, it adds red. And that goes across all of these. More blue, more blue, more blue, more red, more red.
And Robin has a really smart trick where they put their color chart as the background on their iPad, so it's always just there. I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, I realized I had to do that after a while because it's fine for week 1 of having ColorLab to have it in your photos, but then after you've been drawing and taking pictures and just living your life, it gets buried really quickly. So it's really nice to just have it on your background.
So if somebody is they're looking at the chart, maybe they're feeling a little overwhelmed by like all where the blues are and the yellows are. Let's say they just want to hone in on a color and figure out how to mix those together. What would they do?
So right now I'm going to color her skin, and I want her to have a deep brown skin. I really like this brown right here. That's one of my go-tos. So I can see on this number 73 that its recipe is Y, so full yellow, R4, and B3. And that's how I'm going to achieve that brown. Doesn't look like brown when you're that zoomed in. It just looks like a bunch of mush, but looks like brown when you're zoomed out. That's why halftones are so cool. So let's do her skin color, and then we'll just talk through it. So it starts with Y. So I know that I go to here. I'm going to take away this sketch layer for now. I go to my yellow layer. Oh, I selected a different palette. I'm so sorry. I've got the default palette. There we go. Okay. So I select my yellow color that's provided with ColorLab. And then in my ColorLab brushes, since it says Y, I know that it's this brush just labeled yellow. So now that I'm on my yellow layer, I've got yellow selected and I've got my yellow brush. Going to start coloring it in.
Robin, I just have to tell you this comment from Dan. It's good. Dan said, guys, just have to say this system is just brilliant. I'm smiling as Robin is explaining the recipe. So good.
Nice. Yeah, it really is brilliant. Suzanne did an incredible job. Sorry, my iPad freaks out every now and then. I think it is the heat of my hand with the iPad, and also that I draw for so many hours a day. It's probably degrading really quickly. But it's like 98 degrees right now in Salt Lake, and so my iPad is extra hot.
My gosh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not great. All right, so I filled in all of the yellow. So now let's go back to that brown that we want to do. And we've got R4 next. So go back into Procreate, go to my red layer, get my red color, and then I use my red 4 brush, R4. I'm going to color in all of the area that I want to end up with that brown color.
And it's really, and when we were making ColorLab, you know, we were looking at old color charts that we just found from all over the internet. And these are the same abbreviations that they were using. So we didn't just come up with this like crazy numbering system ourselves. I mean, these are, when you're looking at old color charts, these are, this is the system that they used when they were making their own color charts.
Yeah, like if you Google comic, gosh, I probably Google comic color chart or color system or something like that. We really built it off that it is just like that. And, you know, speaking of people talking about where to put that chart, we always thought it looked so pretty that we should like make posters of it.
Yeah.
You could always print out just the one that, if you have a good printer, print out the one that comes with it. But man, we really should make posters someday.
Yeah.
Jacob gave me one actually. Good Cat on Instagram. He printed out one and gave it to me.
Oh, that's awesome.
So could you quickly go over, speaking of the numbers, and let us know, you know, what differentiates red 2 from red 4, let's say?
Yeah, it's just about the density of the color that you're putting in. So red 4 compared to red 2. Red 2 is much less dense. But you also notice that these are formulated in a way where they go together seamlessly right there. It still follows the same dot pattern.
And we should clarify that even though it looks like the R2 on the left-hand side is lighter, they're both 100% opacity. So you want to keep them at 100% opacity, but the reason why it appears lighter is just like Robin said, is that the dots are closer or farther away from one another.
Yeah, and that's something really that you need to take into account when you do start playing with your grain size of your brush, is that if you shrink down this grain size, then it will naturally be more dense. So her brown skin at the end of it would look very different if I changed its brush size to 35% on everything. It's going to be a much more dense, a much more saturated brown.
Mm-hmm. And this really is why sometimes I think some people, for instance, I saw a Facebook ad the other day we were doing for ColorLab. Someone, you know, says, why would I ever pay for this? Can just do this with like Halftones. I'll just download off some free site, which no, you actually can't. I mean, you could do some great stuff, I'm sure, with some download off the site, but Suzanne spent a crazy amount of time making sure that when you do all these different dots over each other, they will all seamlessly blend on top of each other. There's not going to be any weird interference patterns. It's all going to work together holistically, which is not something you will get somewhere else, and took a massive amount of time. So that's a huge advantage of this.
We actually do have a question for Suzanne. Jay asks, does the ColorLab color chart work the same in Illustrator in terms of mixing colors?
Yes. So if you buy the Illustrator version, you're going to set up your layers just the same, where it's actually for the Illustrator version, you know, you're going to have to set up your own layers because the paper textures are raster. There's no way to make those vector. So when you're starting with ColorLab, you're going to still make separate layers for yellow, a layer for red, and a layer for blue. And as long as you set those blending modes to multiply, it's going to be the same. I'm actually considering making some paper textures just as Illustrator files, which you can do very easily right now by just, if you want to use those raster files in Illustrator, you can just open the PSD in Illustrator and all the layers will be there. But yeah, it's the same across all the softwares as far as layer separation and how they interact and mix together. I hope that wasn't confusing.
No, that's perfect.
Chad said Suzanne, halftone relationship counselor.
True.
I'm gonna need that on like a badge or my.
Yeah.
Actually, that's my title now.
All right, let's continue on her skin. So to finish off making this brown, let's look back at the recipe. The last bit is B3. So go back here, go to my blue layer. Use my blue 3 brush. And then just start adding in that blue halftone. And it's going to look crazy and jarring at first, but just trust it. It looks way more nuts on an iPad all blown up. It looks like a big mess of dots. But when we zoom out and the whole area is colored in, you're going to see brown too.
And yet it also has this satisfying thing going for it when you watch it being colored in. Yes.
So there we are. Now we've got brown.
So could you quickly, this might be a little bit more apparent as you color in other areas, but can you explain the layers and how they correspond to the different colors?
The layers and how they correspond to the different colors?
So perhaps depending on the way that you work digitally, you might put all the color that is on the face on separate layers, and then if you were to do the ascots, you would put those on separate layers. But ColorLab works a little bit differently, where all the yellow is going on the yellow layer. So I was hoping you could explain the process a little bit.
Oh, yeah. I have done that though, where I've had to duplicate all 3 of these layers. Like when I do something that needs to work for a landscape and also needs to work in like a long like story size, and we're going to have to move things around, then I'll just duplicate this whole group. But generally, you're keeping all of these layers pure. This is just yellow, this is just red, this is just blue. They're all set to multiply, and then they'll interact with each other correctly. I don't mess with the opacity. I don't mess with its blending mode. It's just multiply at 100%. Unless you want to start playing with weird stuff, but then you're not going to get anything that's like the color chart. You're in your own territory.
Great. So maybe you can color a few other things just so that we can really get a feel for how the color mixing works.
For sure. So now that we've done her face, let's do hers. And for hers, zoom out. I'm going to use that color of peach. So that's yellow 2. We can see right here. Yellow 2 and red 2. So let's start with the yellow. I will select my yellow. I will select my yellow 2 brush, and then I will go to my yellow layer. And now I'm going to color it in. You don't need to worry about being super perfect with this either, because old comics were not done really perfectly. So if it bleeds in a little here and there, that's okay.
Totally. Yeah, that's what I love the most about it.
So I've got all of my yellow too. Go back to the color chart so you can see. Next I'll be using red 2. So back on my red layer. And with the red 2 brush. Okay, now we've got the color of her skin.
Nice. Is that helpful for everyone? We want to move on and make sure we're able to cover how to create some of these kind of warm analog touches like the ink stars and registration errors and whatnot, but we really want to make sure that everyone understands like the fundamentals of what's happening here with how to build up the colors. How does everyone feel? Does that make sense to everyone? Any questions that were unclear?
Somebody asked a really important question. You said, do you update the grain size for all the color brushes? Would you typically have 2 different grain sizes in one picture?
No, never.
Yeah.
Now, if you are going to start messing with the grain size, my suggestion is to find like the sizes that you are comfortable with, which I think you should always have a folder being at 55% at the default size. And then what I did was I just clicked on that folder and I duplicated it. So I've got a whole other ColorLab folder. And then I keep a folder all at like 45% so that when I'm going between different pictures, like let's say I'm working on 2 different ColorLab projects, like for 2 different clients at one time, and they both use different grain size, that would be really obnoxious to keep going back and forth and changing my percentages on every single one. So I just keep one all at like 45% if that's going to be the other percentage that's my default if I'm not using 55%.
Bill had actually said, I think the same thing as you've done, Robin, that Bill had said he saved out one other size of brushes for himself that he just used all the time. So he had 2 different size sets since there's no way to just do it real quick on the fly across the board.
Yeah, sadly there's not. So I keep ColorLab and then I've labeled one as ColorLab small. And I always have them. And I did the same with Duplatone. I've got Duplatone small and Duplatone.
Yeah, but yeah, that's for sure a hard no. Don't ever use them at different brushes at a different grain size. It'll look crazy. It'll look wrong. And it's something that would never happen in real life, which is why it looks weird.
Yeah.
So Monica asked, does the size of the brush make a difference or even in comparison to the size of the document? So the actual brush size, not the grain size.
Oh, no. So maybe you noticed that I moved my brush size down when I was doing the dots on her face. That's because there's a lot that I'm working around, and I really didn't want my brush to be too big and her to get lipstick on her teeth or something like that, or for her to get like bloodshot eyes on accident. by having my brush like really big and uncontrollable. Does that answer it? Is that what you meant?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it doesn't change your grain size when you play with the brush size, thankfully.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks for clarifying that, because yeah, so you can get into all sorts of different spots. You just can't adjust the grain size. And Johannes, I had asked, is Duplictone, a lot of people have been saying this, is Duplictone the same grain size as ColorLab? Can you use them in conjunction at the same percentage?
Yes. They are. They come at the same default size. So when you open ColorLab and you open Duplictone immediately, you can start using them together. They're set to work together. And in turn, if you change the grain size in ColorLab and then you want to start using Duplictone with it, then you need to again change your grain size, the scale of the halftones to the same percentage.
Yeah, and make sure, so Duplictone would be for use with black only. All of these dots come at very specific angles so that they can work together. See how that red overlaps with that yellow there just a little bit? Like they're planned out very, very specifically. And so the black doesn't interfere with those because it's on a whole different angle. And then when they all come together, like if I was to do that, let me see, I'll do it over here on her face where we have blue dots as well. It creates a rosette pattern, which is pleasing to the human eye rather than weird conflicting patterns. So when you pull out, like it looks natural. It gives these like little rosettes of dots.
And props to Suzanne for that, because she actually rebuilt it when we released it for 2021 to make sure that they would work together and that you could just buy them and right out of the box they harmonized together.
Judging by the comments in the chat, it seems like we are good to move on to next steps.
Hold on, I've got a little extra tidbit on that step.
Sure.
Which is with something like lettering. If I decided that I don't want to outline this and I want it to be made up of multiple colors. So if I wanted it to say gee whiz in red, so I know that that's going to take full red and full yellow working together to give me my red color, then I would start with that using my inking brush, the ramen brush. Then I would ink it. See if I can fill that thing in. No. There we are. So I've got my red section of it, but I want it to read as like real true red. So what I would do after I've lettered all of this in one section of that color, then I would just go and click select, and that selected all of everything that's making up that W. And then I would go to my yellow layer and just fill it in. And that's really important because if you have something that doesn't have a bounding box around it, bounding lines around it, you still want these edges to all match so it's all red and you're not like struggling and ending up with like a lot of this, because especially letters are going to look just terrible if they're looking like that. And if you're like trying to do that with, let's see, if I wanted it to be like purple or something, Let's see. So it's got a bunch of dots through it. Then like, it's so much easier to do that and have it match up exactly than it would be if I didn't select it. I'm on my blue layer, I've got my blue brush, but I'm like in here and I'm trying to match this exact line around every single letter. That would suck, and it's probably just not gonna happen. And like, that doesn't look like a purple letter, it looks like a mess.
Yeah, at first when I saw you doing this, I thought you were using masks, but it's actually even more simple than masks.
Yeah, I don't understand masks. Okay, so I think we are ready to move on. Right? No more coloring?
I think we're
let's
good.
do it.
Okay, cool.
So now we would be going into getting analog details right, tips and tricks for getting analog warmth in your work. The first one we have here, I feel like it's worth answering this, even though it's a broader question. Why doesn't my work look like the examples? I feel like we'll get that so many times in reviews and various things.
That's such a loaded question.
It is, but I feel like we should address it because it's asked so much.
I just gotta say, like, you just have to keep at it. I've been drawing like constantly for so many years, and I look at my stuff and I still hate it, and I still pick it apart. I spent was it yesterday that I drew that poster that we were looking at? This guy. Just the line work for this thing took me like 10 hours. And it's still not good enough. And that's just how it's going to be. And I'll be better 10 more years from now, but like, there's just no shortcut to just like working at it and trying to enjoy the process of doing that.
Absolutely. And I think too, like, even everything you've covered so far, I think goes a long way towards getting the look that you're seeing. It obviously won't improve your fundamental art skills, but just following these basic things that Robin and Suzanne and Bailey and I have just mentioned goes so far in making the results better.
Yeah, it really does.
Okay, so the next thing, thanks for answering that, Robin. The next thing was, I have line work on here on getting analog details right, but I feel like you already talked about that. So maybe we move to registration errors.
Yeah. I'm gonna do this in an order that I typically do it, though. I don't do registration first. So when I've colored everything, this is our cooking show version of, I put it in the oven, I brought it out, and here it is. It's all colored. I used the same instructions that I just showed you guys. I didn't do anything weird that we didn't show you. Like, everything was as boring and painstaking as you just saw. And then I made this. But yeah, so I've got everything colored in. It's all looking right. Now, what do I do to make it look more analog? Because right now, it still reads as digital to me. And I don't want that. So what I will do, typically, let's see, just delete these guys here, is just start with my black line layer. And I will add a slight Gaussian blur. And I only do like a 1.3, but I'll go through and do that to each layer.
Can you zoom in super far and do it to one layer so we can try and see?
Yeah, you can try and see. It's
we probably
very
still can't, I guess, because of computers.
Even at 1.3, even with your own eyes on your own computer, you kind of have to like look.
Yeah, it's barely anything. And I'll change it too, depending. Like, if I want more ink bleed, then I will do more Gaussian blur. Typically not on the line layer, and more on something like just the color halftone layers. But this will help give a little bit of ink bleed to it like it would get on the page, because when the ink would hit this page, it doesn't just sit there, it soaks into the page a little bit. And your eyes notice that. Like, your eyes have become very attuned to a lot of things in your life, and they notice a sharp edge, and a sharp edge does not look natural.
Can I throw in a fun fact about this Gaussian blur that I learned today, Robin?
Yeah.
So I got curious when we were talking about Gaussian blur, and I just wanted you all to know that Gaussian blur is named after Carl Friedrich Gauss, who came up with the Gaussian function. It's a mathematical function that was made way before computers, like in the 19th century, that essentially it's a mathematical function that makes everything have that really soft, beautiful blur. Fun fact. Kind of.
Wait, but why? I want to know why.
Why the math works?
No, why he did it.
I'll get back to you on that. I don't know, because he liked math. I don't know.
You stopped there? Oh my God.
Sorry, I always wondered what's Gaussian mean. I thought it meant something with gauze, maybe. That sounds very Jessica Simpson or something to me, but I thought it meant like gauze. But it's actually like a famous mathematician came up with this. So Gaussian blur is literally retro.
Oh.
Yeah, I tried to actually type Gaussian blur and it auto-corrected as a proper pronoun, which made me realize it was like named after somebody, but I didn't know that before either.
So going into the distressing part of this, we have a question from Pulp Americana, actually, who asks, what is your general application of aging and decay? I always feel I either put too much or too little. Love you, Robin.
Love you. Yeah, so let's get into that. So I'll do my blur first. And that's really important because everything that I do from here, I'm going to be degrading it and like adding like little speckles, or I guess, subtracting little speckles where you'll be able to see through the ink. And then if I add the blur after that, it's just going to like smush like these holes of speckles together. And it's going to undo a lot of the work that I've done. So I've thrown my blur on there, and I'll again start in order. And I just take the eraser tool, because this is how I do things. I just destroy it after. I've been really into this subtle ink damage lately, and I'll start with that like almost every single time. I've got my opacity down. It looks like I'm at about 60. I've got the size at about 64. These numbers don't really matter, but I don't want it to be full strength on there because I like to just take it and let's see. I'll do that so you can really see it. Take it and I'll just like tap around. And now I can like kind of see the color layers under it, just like you do on a comic book when you see that their color layers had a lot of trapping in there. Trapping is when you give some room for it to wiggle on the press and you don't want like a big white border. They call that trapping. And now I can see all of that. And so that reads as natural. So I'll just like go around and just tap at it and subtract from areas that I want to look a little more messed up. And I'll generally go through and do that to each layer. These things tend to really be more like, if this was just a page on its own, it would tend to do that more on the edges than like straight in the middle, because people touching there, because when the plate is hitting it, it's not hitting as hard on the edge as it is on the inside. So it'll tend to be a little more messed up on the outside. So that's something to really keep in mind when you're doing that.
Oh, I never knew that. 16.
But yeah, I'll go through with that same one and just give the same like application throughout. That makes them all like just a little bit lighter too. And after I've done that, I will go through and again using the eraser. I like all of these, like the ink flake, subtle overspray, ink transfer, ink fleck, and just try taking away at various sizes. Like right here, it's still pretty clean, but I can do that there. It seemed like too much there. What's really nice about working digitally is I can control where those things are, because you don't necessarily want to see like a lot of destruction in the eyes or a lot of destruction in the mouth, because that's how humans have learned to read other humans, is their eyes and their mouth and things like that. If suddenly that area is all messed up, like the picture's just not going to look as good to you. It's going to ruin a lot of the feeling that you're getting from her. So because we're doing this digitally, we can control and not hit those specific areas as hard.
Oh, that just reminded me. I have a cool resource I can share with people about this. So when we were making ColorLab, and when I say we were making, what I mean is Suzanne was meticulously making the dot and halftone brushes, and we were having meetings and talking about, all of us talking about how to make it authentic. I don't want to take any of the credit for the meticulous halftone stuff that went on. But we found this little article here. I'll put it in the comments here. And it's about the grading of comic books, for if you're like trying to grade the value of one. But if you scroll down a little bit on that page, it will show you a ton of different terms for comics. And it's kind of helpful if you're like an artist to read them and understand the things that really happened. It'll get into all sorts of things like foxing, which is kind of this like slight darkening around the edges of a comic because there's a little more oxidation, because the air can touch the outer part of the paper more than farther inside the comic. But it's kind of a fun little resource. Sorry, Robin, go ahead.
No, that is cool. And yeah, I'm always thinking about those things. I think because I've come from analog and I'm still working a lot with analog, it is easier for me, I think, to like know what looks right. And I don't even have words for it half the time, like what feels right here, what feels like it's actually on a piece of paper. But yeah, like learning why will also help you understand like how to apply it yourself when you're trying to fake it digitally.
Right. I hate analogies, but I think we use them all the time. But it's kind of like spices. Too many will ruin the whole thing. One thing that I feel like is like a tell sign that someone hasn't done it a lot is when they'll get like a distressing brush or a bunch of them and put them just all over something.
Yeah.
And it ruins it. It ruins the illusion of it being old.
Absolutely. So yeah, after I've subtracted with the eraser brush, I'll go through and do some additive stuff. Like I just added some of that ink transfer. Again, I'm like sticking a lot harder on the edges. And just adding it like here and there. That looks really great and like sloppy printing. You don't want too much, but you do want some. I'll do some subtle overspray too, maybe. And I'll even do that on my color layers. Because if this was being printed, they would all be coming from plates or screens, and they would get the same kind of effects coming off of them. Okay. I think that's plenty.
I think you addressed this question about would you rather blur first and then distress, or distressed and then blur?
Blur
But
first, for sure.
blur first.
Yeah, because if I blur this now, it's not gonna look. It's gonna take away like we'll zoom in real hard here. And I'm on my black layer. Take my Gaussian blur. And see how the further up I put it, the less you're seeing any of that.
Yeah.
And what we're like looking at here is like kind of the toothiness of the paper poking up through the ink. And so that would be a little sharper, a little more defined than like the ink bleeding.
Sure. That makes sense.
So then something else that you can do, and I'll just stick with these same pens that come with ColorLab, is do an edge starve. And I bring my opacity way, way, way down. I'm going to try 17%. And I want it to be pretty small too.
Can you tell the story of Edge Starve, Robin?
Yeah.
Tell me that story again.
So when ink loves a comic book very, very much, when the plate is striking, like this is a plate that has ink on one side of it and it's hitting just like when you've used like a rubber stamp. It's sort of similar. Around the edge, it will pool because there's some like, I don't know, it wants to hang on to the edge because it's liquid. And it will want to recede from there just slightly. And you'll see it do this thing called edge starve. I'm going to boost that up a little more. Or like leave this like blank area.
Kind of like how water in a glass, like before it flows over, it'll actually kind of bulge over the top because it doesn't want to break its own edge, so it will get darker.
Yeah. So it's all like trying to stick together here, and you actually see the edge of the plate hitting here, and then you see the excess over on that side. I think that's how that's working.
Yeah, and if you look at like vintage printed stuff, you see this everywhere, but I always see it in old matchbooks.
Yeah, matchbooks are a big one because they tend to be glossy, so they don't want to suck up the ink as much. So it has more time where after it's hit, either a plate hits or a screen hits it with ink, it has more time where the ink is sitting there wet, and so it's going to do what liquid does. Whereas like with all of these dots, you're not going to see it because it doesn't have the opportunity to pool like it does around these solid areas. And that's also what a lot of matchbooks are. They're not really often halftones. They're more often solids hanging out on top of one another.
That makes a lot of sense, though. Yeah, it's just sitting there, staining it essentially on that cover of a matchbook.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm doing this with the dry nib right now. Really small. Let's see. I'm at like 15%, and that feels about right comparative to the size of the dots. That's going to change if you have a different dot size, if you have a different line size. This feels about right to me. And then my opacity is hanging out around 18%. But I'm just going around and wearing away at the edges. And that'll mostly happen, again, on like big solid areas where ink has the chance to pool. her eyes, anything like that. Even on these reds, and not really on halftone areas.
You know where this happens too? Now that I'm thinking about it, a very similar thing happens. Do you ever use Posca markers?
No, I don't.
So they're essentially like paint markers, and every so often you have to kind of push down. They have like a little spring-loaded thing, and extra paint will come out, and it will do that same thing. Like it'll be too much, and it will pool around the edges where it's not trying to break the little filmed edge of the liquid, and it gets dark there, and then you're trying to dab it off. But in the case you're talking about, it doesn't get dabbed off because it's mass-produced.
Well, they actually would. And they still do. They still run presses like this. Like this local magazine is run on a web press. And we talked about it because I was running into issues. I stuck like a lot of red and a lot of black with really intricate detail. And it was getting really muddy. And they told me that they'll like run a bunch and they'll watch it. And eventually it'll gum up. All the screens will gum up. And then they'll run a bunch of shit through a dry run until it's no longer printing anything, and then they'll start a run again. And I'm sure that you've noticed that if you get like two, especially of like the same old product or something, or like you'll see two magazines that are printed on more like newsprint in your town, and you'll look at them side by side, and one is like more saturated than the other one. That's because between them they ran a dry run so that it could clear all the excess off of the screens or the plates.
Mm.
But yeah, that's basically all I'll do on that sort of thing. And then lastly, I will move things off register. And because these things are being printed really quickly on newsprint by 1, 2, 3, 4 screens or plates, then they have a lot of opportunities to shift a little bit. And so that's why you'll see things get off register. So I'll typically leave the black layer alone because I want it to still look balanced. This has a really hard to find edge. It's going to hang out on Instagram. We don't want that to be off center. So we're going to leave that on center and I'm going to move the red, take snapping off, and move it just slightly. So now that's given us all that. You'll see it get like super, super off sometimes in comics. Sometimes it looks great, sometimes not so great.
And another reason why the multiply is so important. Obviously, the halftones don't work if you don't multiply, but also if you didn't have halftones, if it was just solid colors and you didn't have multiply, the registration error would look really dumb.
Yeah. There you go. That's
nice.
Like everything that I would do.
That looks amazing. And you dropped some serious knowledge bombs there. I did not know some of those things about printing presses you mentioned, like what was the last one you just mentioned? I had never heard that before. Anyways.
Doing like the dry run on a web press or something?
Yes. Yeah. I just appreciate you mentioning that because I never really quite understood that. And now I understand what you see when that happens.
Yeah, it's really standard for printing mass quantities. There was a time when I had to do, oh my God, I had to screen print 600 album covers, which sucked. But you would expect, you get to like 150 of those things and you start you've got your screen, you're pushing your ink through and it goes down onto the page, but it'll start pooling on the other side. And if you have any of these like fine lines or like details like dots, they all start to muddy and you have to stick a dry piece of paper under there, not take any ink with it, and pull it through and just like try to take off the excess onto something.
Super interesting. Okay, so we've gone through all of the things to get the small details that really finish the look. We're getting low on time, but I think we have time to talk about. Let's see. I feel like we're not going to have time to talk about the printing part right now and truly do it justice. But maybe we could talk about the choosing vintage color palettes and your philosophy behind it, and then do maybe like 10 or 15 minutes of Q&A and address printing in one of the upcoming weeks. I know you talked about maybe sharing an actual print project you're working on.
Yeah, I totally think we should do that.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about color. We did have two methods, and then we realized that the second method, which is kind of a fast but not quite as authentic way to do it, but we can't demonstrate that because the computer is being used to show what we're doing right now. So we're going to just go over the philosophy of color. Robin had shared a really good philosophy on color, and Robin, you're so good at it. Can you share that with everyone?
Are we talking about how I pick things like browns and grays, or are we talking about like my whole color plan across something?
I'm thinking of, and I think this is what people are asking when they're asking about color palettes. A lot of people in the survey had said, well, how do you choose your colors, and also how do you make sure they're authentic to a certain era? But I think even more so than the era, because you could obviously look at a reference to see what colors there are. How do you choose your colors and make them balance? What's your philosophy on that?
Man, sometimes it's easier than other times. Like even this one, I thought I was going to do like a blue jean color around them, and I ended up with green because from experience, this brown color of her skin looks so much nicer against greens than it does almost anything. Anything that's like really yellow heavy looks really great with this color. And with the blue, it was like she was almost the same tone as the background. And so I ended up having to recolor it when I put this thing in the oven before you guys got here, because it just wasn't looking how I had hoped it would. So a lot of it's trial and error. The other thing, and you'll pick up those things. You'll be like, oh, if I'm going to have like, this big one color object and it's floating in this field, then I know that this field color is going to look much better as this than it would be something else. The other thing that I do, if I'm doing something more along the line of like a paneled comic, is we can look at like a real life example here, is I will keep things, oh my God, I just tried to zoom in. Let's just zoom in. So Jughead here, that's full saturation. That's full saturation. Archie's like pretty close to full saturation. He's got things that are full saturation, reds and blues and yellows all around him. But this background, the yellow in it is half-toned. The blue in it is half-toned. Basically everything back here is toned down because it's not at full saturation, and the characters up front are. And if it doesn't like meet that criteria, well, there's a lot of black here and there's less in the background. So that's something that I tend to think about a lot. That didn't end up happening a lot here. I've got like, this is not full saturation. These aren't full saturation. But I tried to do that with my black lines instead.
But I guess that like it probably is something you do more when there's more like dimension or difference between a foreground and a background.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And also it depends on the era and it depends on the style of comic. What I tend to look at is a lot of like the Archie that I showed, or like these Casper comics, and that's the way that they do things. And I'll keep things out too if I don't want to like really struggle and I'm doing something that may be different than what I'm used to. I want to like push my boundaries, or I've got a scene where I'm not quite sure how I'm going to balance it. I will pull out my comics and I will look at them and see how they balanced out something.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that kind of goes, that kind of pairs well with the idea that I used to, when I was doing a lot more design work, if I would have all sorts of resources that I collected, different advertisements, comic books, labels, whatever. And I would literally, I have something right now that I use called Color Snapper 2. I would literally just sample the colors and build the palette, and then I would kind of adjust for yellowing or things that happen to the paper. And I would always just be like, well, I feel comfortable with a smaller color palette. Like sometimes you'll use quite large color palettes, but if you're uncomfortable, use a smaller one and base it off of something that you've already seen. And I think just doing that and combining that with learning more about color by building them up in ColorLab, you'll start to kind of get this second sense like Robin has for it.
Yeah, I think that goes with anything too. Like even if you're doing an oil painting, like most oil painters will say to keep your color palette relatively small. Make the more complex colors out of your certain base colors. Don't get like 75% through a piece of art and then be like, you know what? Let's make this spot purple. Because it's going to read as just like, it's just going to destroy what you've done. It's much easier to do actually with ColorLab because you are already restricted and these are already made up of this particular yellow, this particular magenta, and this particular blue. It's much easier to balance. And that's kind of the beauty of it.
I have to mention one of the. I need to know if you approve of this hack, Robin. So, I have seen some people, and I think it works great. Is if you say have an example piece of art where you like the color palette, if you have it in Photoshop or something where you can adjust the hue, if it's all in one single layer, you can slightly adjust the hue of that and it will change the hue of everything, which means all the relationships between the colors are maintained.
Mm-hmm.
And then voila. Mm-hmm. Is that how you say it? Voila, you have a new color palette. It works sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes it looks disastrous or monstrous, but it works a lot of times.
Oh yeah, totally. It can look really good with like really bizarre psychedelic stuff, especially, or like I don't know how Mary Blair made the color palette she does, but sometimes it looks like she did that. And I guess that's just becoming really familiar with different colors relationships and working with the color wheel, but that's not something that I comprehend.
There in Illustrator you can like choose global color, and there's this, if you pull up like edit colors, there's this like color wheel and it has spots all over it where all your colors are coming from, and you can like slightly turn it and it like adjusts like all of your colors relationship on the like it keeps their relationship but changes it. It's super cool. I don't know that it works the same in Procreate, but it's a way to change colors. Really cool.
It does kind of. So, Robin, if you go to the color picker and then go to the section, I think it says like harmony. Yeah. You can, on the top left-hand side, select what kind of harmony you're wanting. So it does like tetratic and analogous and things like that. So you pick your base color, the color you know that you want, and then let's say you wanted to do a split complementary, it'll aggregate the colors that are complementary to the one that you picked.
That's cool.
Um,
I think you have to choose. Does it? Well,
so you can play with that. I also highly recommend, I'm going to put it in the chat, there's a book called Color, funny enough, by Betty Edwards, and it's one that a lot of art schools assign when teaching color theory. Super helpful and easily understood. Oops.
Did you say you were going to put a link to that?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so we've gone as we kind of expected might happen, much longer than we thought we would, but we really wanted to make sure to get to some of your additional questions that would come up while you were watching this. Bailey, I can't see it. Sorry, what?
I saw one that I don't think we've touched on, but as part of ColorLab. So the paper textures, those layers, can you just explain what the top layers are in those?
And real quick, Bailey, if any of these questions are in the Ask a Question, you can activate them on, and then it will show everyone that's the question being answered?
Right.
So yeah, up here, we've got the adjust ink effects, and that's set to screen. It comes automatically at 49% opacity. You can make it much heavier, and it's going to create like a, I don't know, how do you say that? Like it's going to look lighter, but in a pattern like it's on paper, like less ink is sticking to the paper or something.
Yeah.
And then under that, you've got adjust texture, and that's on color burn, and that's also on 50%. And that'll darken it in the, like, what is it, like the pits of the grain.
Yeah, and like the shadow parts get more intense and really aren't as visible in a full color piece like this. It makes a difference that's not, it's I don't know, pretty subtle.
Yeah, it is, but it's still so noticeable to your eyes.
Yeah.
Your eyes have gotten so attuned to real life and looking at things on paper, and this really helps replicate it, because without it, it looks so saturated. And
Yeah.
it still has that aged cover stock paper. Like if you had just imported a JPEG of paper, stuck it on there, done multiply, like this is how it would look. But what we've included with ColorLab is also the effects of it sitting on the paper so that you can see the highlights and the shadows of light playing off the paper and the ink.
Cool.
So I actually thought we had a bunch of Q&As, and then I just realized that they've all been answered through except for the Lisa said very confused about how to use the new solid color palettes. But I feel like if we get into that right now, we're going to start something that we can't finish. That's going to be very frustrating. So maybe we should do that next week. Or we also have a video that kind of briefly addresses that, but I think it's in the Secret Society.
Well, so that's actually that's a bonus that we gave away for the birthday. So if you go to the download page, if you bought ColorLab and you go to the download page, it's the tutorial. It's a 2-part tutorial. So just make sure that you're seeing both parts. the first part, Robin shows you how they ink with how they color with the solid color palettes. And then part 2 is on a second tab within that box. And that's where Robin shows you how to translate those solid colors into matching them with the color chart from ColorLab and building up those colors from there. I think, Robin, if you scroll up a little bit.
In the meantime, we also have a YouTube video, which I am putting in the chat right now, which kind of explains Robin's process. It does use Duplatone, but it's the same in terms of how Robin uses the solid colors and then translates that to the halftones.
Is Robin? Oh, Robin, there you are. I thought I lost you. Yeah, so see how there's 2 tabs?
Yeah.
So there's like a part 1, and then right next to it is the part 2. So just want to make sure people know that there are 2 parts to it. Maybe that was confusing. Cool.
Oh, this is rad. Look, I was able to get this thank you on here. So I think that's it. I hope you guys got a lot of value out of this. It sounds like lots of people were saying thanks and that they felt like they got a lot of value out of it. We couldn't get to the printing. Someone said, when will you talk about the printing? We do these live drawings every Thursday. Specifically, Bailey and Robin are present for them. But we could certainly talk some more about printing, and we've talked about it. It sounds like, Robin, you'd be really interested in, it sounds like you'd be interested in doing this. Let me know, or maybe perhaps it's torturous. You had talked about maybe documenting your printing process when you actually go and print stuff, because we'd love to cover it somehow for you guys.
And we do have a tutorial. It's not the same thing necessarily as watching somebody do it live, but we do have a tutorial that Robin kindly made for us about how they screen print or how they transfer Duplatone from Procreate to the screen. And that is in the chat.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much from all of us. We're going to go. There will be a recording here of this. You can come right back to this link and watch this later if you want to refer back to anything. And yeah, feel free to message us if something comes up. We're happy to help you get the most out of it. And thanks for supporting us. Thanks for supporting ColorLab. It takes a lot of time to make products like this, and time literally is money. It takes a lot of time and money and conversations and researching. So thanks for investing in the product and helping us to keep going year after year. So thanks a lot. And I think that's it. Does anyone else have any final words?
I just want to real quick plug the Secret Society. So we have a community of wonderful artists who every day, every week post tutorials, resources. They post their own art to get feedback on. If you join, you can post your art and get feedback on it from people like Robin and other industry professionals. We have a really...
Robin's got it pulled up.
Let's focus on that. Robin posts, yeah, so this week we gave away one of our lettering books, which are a real hot commodity. Robin posts behind the scenes of their artwork that they do every Thursday for the live stream. So if you join us, you can see not only them make the artwork on Thursdays when they do the live stream, but their sketches, their references, their inspiration. And it really pays for itself. I've learned a lot since taking on the mantle of moderation, and I know that other people have learned a lot. So it's worth taking a look. You can click the link at the bottom of the screen and be taken right there. It's free for the first 30 days, and it's worth every penny.
Absolutely is. We totally made it thinking that every month you should you should walk away from it feeling like you at least doubled your money. That it's $14 a month after the first 30 days, easy to cancel, and we're literally not even making a profit, to be honest on it right now. It really is a labor of love, and someday I'm sure it will, but it's just a great fun community with lots of resources. But thanks for mentioning that, Bailey. Okay, well, I think that's it. Thank you again so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Robin, Suzanne. I know it's late for you. Thank you, Bailey, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks,
All right,
guys.
Okay.
Bye.